Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
And I feel, sir, I should stand up for you. I feel I should stand up for you, but I'm surrounded with so much stuff, that's going to be difficult. Anyway, if you'd like to give us a call and have a talk with me and this great gentleman, Henry Young, who is young, and probably one of the most vital people on the planet. I can't believe that, looking at you, that you were 100 years old last Tuesday.
I'm very, very lucky. Very, very lucky, Joe.
Is it luck or is it genes? Or is it training?
Well, obviously you've got to have good genes, but it's strange, really, because my Uncle Henry, after whom I was named, was captain of Geelong for 8 years, and he was a fitness fanatic and died at 49 halfway along the swimming pool. So I don't know what's happened to the genes, but...
Do you sense that there is a particular mission that you have been given in life?
Well,
because it's an extraordinary thing.
It's been wonderful. You know, I've really had an exciting life and a very full life, and I'm enjoying it to the full.
Yeah, what you say about... I mean, my father died when I think he was 41 or 42, and, the generations, I suppose, produce advancements and opportunities and things that didn't exist back in the 1930s and 40s. But lifestyle is important, I'm sure. But do you take vitamins, or do you have a secret potion that you take every night?
Yeah. After the war, I had about 18 months, I suppose, in New Zealand, and my first job on the land, my first job was go in and bring the horses in and harness up the horses.
Yes.
You know, it was what they call hill country. And in New Zealand, hill country is the country that you can't get a tractor on. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine it was up and down.
Let me take this. It might be interesting. Hello? Hello? No, that's gone. I don't know. This telephone rings and can interrupt. So I'll have to ask your forgiveness for that. So there's no vitamin, there's no potion that you take that keeps you enormously fit. You don't have a walking stick or anything like that. You do have a tennis racket.
No, I'm a walking advertisement for the medical profession.
I would have thought that you would keep away from doctors, because once you go to see one, they are always looking for something.
Doctors are my best friend. I'm a walking testament to them.
Well, you're not telling me that you're on some youth drug or anything like that, are you?
No, I'm very lucky. I keep on saying how lucky I am, and I really do mean it.
And I read that you didn't take up tennis until you were 60.
Well, I was in the AMP Land Development Scheme after the war, and it was tough, and we were expanding, and when you've got the banks on your back. And I had them on my back, I suppose, for about 15 years.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
You know, that was... I didn't have time for playing tennis. You know, during my war years, I always played tennis and squash, but during my early farming years, I'd play about half a dozen games a year, I suppose, and that was it, until I retired. And then what do you do when you're tired? You can either vegetate or you can go out and enjoy yourself, doing the things that you love, and I love my tennis. It's competitive, and that's what I love about it.
But is it possible that a tough life, and you probably wouldn't find a tougher life than yours, I mean, fighter pilot and then a farmer, is anything tougher than being a farmer? Is it that we, lesser people, are too soft?
Yeah, they're complementary in a way, in that they... you're working for yourself, both flying and farming, and you get the results of your labour. You know, in other words, it's very rewarding.
Well, you've got to see a result for the effort, haven't you?
Yes, you do. And the more you put into it, the more you get out of it.
Yes.
And there comes a time when you start to retire, and all those good things that you'd done early on just have multiplied by then. And
Yes.
I make a lot more money now doing nothing than I ever did, because I put away a little bit, and then we sold the property, and the three boys didn't want to go on the land, and so it all went to the share market. And
Well, the share market sort of goes up and down. I mean, it has its rewards, but it also has its problems.
it does go up and down, but it always seems to go up a little bit higher sometime than what it was before.
Yes, there is some rhyme and reason to it, but to me it's a little bit like going to the casino. Not that I go to the casino.
Yes, it's you really don't want to be dependent upon it.
No.
It's nice to have it as an additive.
No. I was reminded the other day of the talking about the stock market. That years ago, I think it was back in the 1960s, there was a thing called Poseidon. And people who had
remember.
Yeah, people who had never bought a share in their lives, partly media hysterics or whatever, and I think they were about 7 cents, the shares, and almost overnight they went to hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And people were fighting to get a little piece of this action. It was a big deal.
Yes.
And it goes to show you that there's no rhyme or reason. And you think back to the tulips in the 1700s in Holland, where they were worth, a tulip bulb was worth, out of nowhere, out of the blue, worth more than gold.
Yes.
But
It was an extraordinary time.
Yeah, but what put me on to thinking about it was this... Caroline, what's that waste reducing drug called? What's it called? Ozempic, yeah. Ozempic. Well, Ozempic is a drug that is given to people who have diabetes, and they've suddenly discovered that it has this side property that causes people to lose weight. And consequently, diabetics can't get their hands on it because every chemist you go to, and I know this because my doctor put me onto it. He told me I had to lose, I was 9 or 20 kilos or something. And I find myself amazed that you can create an absolute frenzy on the stock market, and probably elsewhere as well, out of almost thin air.
Yes, it's extraordinary.
Well, tulip bulbs, or
and I'm sure that's the reason so many people get their fingers burned in the stock market.
Well, I suppose it is, but the next big thing, maybe the next big stocks and shares, and I'm no tipster, but I would imagine it is going to be drugs and miracles and things like that.
A wave of optimism goes through.
Oh, well, you've got to believe in something. Tell me about the war years. I didn't do national service, but I have a sort of a fascination for war stories and war years and history and things like that.
I was born in Glenelg, and my father was a banker and transferred to New Zealand, and for some reason or other, New Zealand was the only empire country that supplied pilots to the Royal Navy. Mm-hmm. So, and I still remember it. I was still at school when the war started, and our head prefect, who was just on 18 in the sixth form, and he was immediately commissioned and came back to the school to say goodbye. And I can just remember how my heart went out, and I thought, I'll never, ever get there.
It'll be over too quickly.
Well, because he was going to fly, and every young boy, every schoolboy, really wants to be a fighter pilot.
Yes,
and I was a Sea Scout, so
I still
could
do.
Be not only fly and be a fighter pilot, but I could fly in the Navy. So
what were you flying?
We started off on the Spitfire. Well, of course, we went through New Zealand being the only country that supplied the pilots for the Royal Navy, you had to go through a lot of hurdles to get there, but because I was from 17 planning my course, I got there, and just before they sent me to England, which was direct, the Japs attacked.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened in Australia, but in New Zealand they panicked. The army was in Egypt, the Air Force was in England, the Navy was in the Mediterranean. All they had back in New Zealand were the 18-year-olds. Mm-hmm. So they sent me a telegram saying, report to the Wellington railway station on Monday, you're in the army. And about 6 months later, I'm behind a Vickers machine gun on the beaches of outside Wellington. And we used to practice strategic withdrawals, which meant going straight up the mountains there, carrying
a Vickers
machine gun, the tripod, buckets of cans of water, because it was water cooled, all the ammunition. And I'll never forget it. Anyway, the Navy said, the Royal Navy said, what happened to those beautiful young men that you promised us? And the New Zealand Army said they're in the army and they're staying there till the Americans get down here. So the Americans did finally get down there. Oh, and then the Navy said, what did you put them in the army for? You could have put them in the Air Force. And they could have learnt something. So they took us out of the army and put us into the Air Force. There's only about 15 of us, I think. And then finally we got away.
Did you learn to fly?
Passenger cargo, yes, to England, and there they teach you in the Navy you're a seaman first, and whatever your skill is, whatever your trade is, then like an airman second or a fitter or an electrician second, all that kind of thing.
Yes.
And then it was somebody's bright idea that with the Pacific, the two fleets getting together in the Pacific, why don't we get some of these young bloods that are learning to fly and send them to America, and then when the two fleets get together, they'll talk the same language. And so I was one of those selected, and I spent, I think, 13, 14 months in the United States learning to fly as a 20-year-old.
What were you flying?
A Boeing Stearman, which was
beautiful.
Like a Tiger Moth, only a bit better.
Double wing.
Double wing.
Yes.
And then we worked up through the trainers, the two other trainers, and then finally onto Corsairs. That's where I did my operational training on Corsairs. Oh, and also I did a dive bombing one on Dauntlesses. And then back to England. And really, I cost the taxpayer a lot of money because it wasn't long before I was back in England. We couldn't do our deck landing because in the United States, because we drive on the left-hand side of the road and they drive on the right-hand side, and exactly the same in God alone knows how it happened. But
does that apply to aircraft carriers too?
Yeah, well, the signal, if you're too low in the United States Navy is with your arms, the batsman has his hands down low, and that means that you are to go lower, whereas in the Royal Navy it means you are too low.
Well, you'd want to get all of that right, wouldn't you?
So, that's why they sent us back to England to do our deck landing training, and it wasn't long before the war ended, really, and so really all I really did during the World War II was just cost the taxpayer a lot of money.
But were you in any air fights?
No, I never got out into action.
Well, thank God for that, because I don't know that many of the young men who trained in those early days of the Battle of Britain made it through. It was a very small number of people who survived.
Yes, I know, and it was the same too It saved me from the Russian convoys, and the Russian convoys to the Fleet Air Arm was a deadly business because they had to have the carriers away from the convoys, further away from Norway, and You can imagine putting in a couple of hours flying around on top of a convoy and then flying about 100 miles further out to sea to land back on your carrier, which would be going up and down like a yo-yo with...
Yeah. What is it like to... Because you're travelling, 100 knots or 120 knots, and the carrier is moving and you're flying into the wind and you're trying to land on a postage stamp. What does that feel like?
Well, it's tricky because we only had the back half of the carriers to land on.
Just
that
the back
was
half?
Before some genius thought of angle flight decks. So halfway along the ship we had the crash barriers, and if there's a seaway on, you never know whether the round down's going to be coming up or going down, so you have to come in high, and you have to be just above the stalling speed so that you can land on what's left of the carrier. Yeah. And so, yes, it was tricky, but we had to turn to the landing because with just above the stall you've got your nose up so you can't see in front of you. That's why you have a batsman out to one side on a little outrigger cantilevered
thing on the side of the boat, yeah.
With a big net underneath him so that
just in case. Yeah. But did you...
So yes, it's exciting, but it's like everything else. When you do things well, you love it, and you never. All fleet air pilots will remember the thrill you get when you catch a wire and the harness just closes in around you in one great big beautiful home to mother hug.
But those cables across the deck of a carrier, how many of them are there? You've got how
10
many?
of them. 10 of them.
So you got one. You only need one chance.
But you miss the first three because it's going up and down. You can't. You can't do those. And the 10th wire. Yeah. It's got a name. It's called the God Almighty wire. and in actual fact, the God Almighty wire, it takes a little bit of the pressure off, but you still get it in the crash barrier. But number 9, you just stop just short of it. But God Almighty wire, and I've never caught it, but they say it's well known.
Well, it's there, and very necessarily. I would
lucky,
think.
Jeremy. It's.
Oh, no,
I've never had an accident on the deck. There's not many fleet air pilots that can say that.
But, no.
But so I feel
well, it's skill. When war is over, you're demobbed, and it must be a terrible anticlimax to go from all that adrenaline and, of course, the glamour of being a fighter pilot, and you come back and you decide to be a farmer.
Yes, it is. It's a big letdown. It's such a letdown that I thought that to get this kind of wanderlust out of me, in New Zealand, when Captain Cook came round, which was a long time ago, but they liberated pegs on islands and included in New Zealand for shipwrecked sailors. You know, they
thoughtful.
It was part of the Royal Navy's
strategy,
preparation for what they knew would come. Yeah. And these are now called Captain Cookers, so they went rampant, and so did the deer. And the farmers could keep down the deer and the pigs in the easy country, but in the back country they just flourished. And so the New Zealanders had what they called deer shooters that went out, and you got paid so much for skin. And
did you do that?
And so I did a summer season when I came back from the war, and that really set me up, you know.
Well,
in other words, it brought me back to earth. And
were you married then?
Yes, then I was going to be a farmer, and I was going to be a farmer in New Zealand. And but then when Australia started the Fleet Air Arm, the Royal Navy said it will take you a couple of years to train up Navy pilots to Air Force standard, Navy standard, and the Air Force hate me saying that. but nevertheless, they said, we'll do it, we'll supply the aircrew for the first 2 years. Yeah. And 2 of my friends who had flown with me during the war came to me and said, you know, Henry, the 3 of us should go across and join up. They'd love us. You know, we've got all we're fully trained, and so that's what we did. We came across to Melbourne, and they did love us, and they sent us across to England to actually on a passenger liner.
Oh.
And that's where I met my good wife, Madge.
Lovely.
And I had a short-term girl on the ship. Because the Navy has short-term girls and long-term girls. And
I think that is a very good concept.
well, you're never in one place long enough to have a long-time girl, and
No.
and they're more fun, the short-term girls. But I had enough sense to not only admire Madge in the pool, but to get all the detail.
And how old were you then?
Oh, I would have been the ripe old age of about 22, 23, yeah, round about then. And she was 6 months younger, and the whole ship was just full of young girls. It was a cruise liner going to England about 2.5 years after the war had ended, and 6 weeks on a cruise liner as a first class passenger. On full pay plus flying pay.
Were you in uniform?
And in uniform.
What could go wrong?
So it's true to say that, I've had a pretty good choice thrown in front of me. In other words,
and these beautiful,
there would have been hundreds of girls.
but a wonderful and very long marriage, I understand. Sadly, you lost her only recently.
We had 74 years, and I lost her 6 months ago. And it's such a huge hole because we'd done so much together. Yeah. When the Sydney came to Sydney, and actually I met her. I had while we were working up to go on the Sydney, the aircraft carrier, the Sydney, and we were in Northern Ireland, and this would be 6 months after our cruise liner had berthed, and I'd had an accident and an argument with the gun sight. That's right. It actually split over the top of my head, and so they bandaged all that up, and then they gave me 3 weeks leave because it was it's Christmas and New Year as well. And where can you go for a holiday with your head in bandages? And there's only one place where you can blend in, that's the ski fields. In other words, you've got people walking around on crutches and arms in slings. And
walking wounded.
So I'm in London organising this, and only for one day, and who should I see walking along the footpath in Piccadilly 1 week before Christmas? Now, you can imagine the odds of doing that, walking in and finding a person that you knew when you've been 3 months in United Kingdom, and so it was anyway. That was Madge, and she was going round to the Barclay Bank, and
it meant to be,
yeah. And so that put her in. She had taken a job over Christmas in Selfridges, was it? Yeah, no, that's not the. Simpsons, that's right, Simpsons. Yes. Simpsons of Piccadilly. They put her in the front, just in the double doors, and the front is kind of a honey trap selling ties. And I can understand putting her there. And,
casting, it's called casting.
Yeah, so that she only had an hour for her lunch, and she was in this lunch going round to Berkeley Square to get this money. So we walked around there together, and because it was she was worried about she wouldn't be back in time for her hour. We got a taxi back, and that's when I asked her whether she'd ever been kissed in Piccadilly, and she said she hadn't been. So we fixed that, and that's when I moved her up to the top of my
list.
My list under for Sydney. So it worked out, and then of course when the carrier came to Sydney, we went out, and then in actual fact I played rugby for the United Services team while the ship was being refitted.
Yeah.
And so we had about 3 or 4 months, I suppose, when I came up the first time and stayed in the Sydney in dry dock, and I hated it. It was a ship's a warm, lovely thing, and it moves and it's got noises, and you identify each one of those noises, and you get it in dry dock, all the power comes from outside, there's no noise, and it's dead, and it's horrible. So that's when I put the hard word on Reggie's parents, may I stay there? So I'd be excused flying on Friday afternoon, and up I'd go on my motorbike. And about 2 o'clock in the morning on Monday morning, I'd roar down the highway and back to now. In time for 7:30 muster. So
You've done so much, and everything seems to be. I'm sure there were ups and downs, particularly when you were flying. But is there anything that you feel that you would like to go back and do again, or something that you have in the back of your mind that I got to do this before I go?
Well, all my flying years, I'd love to do all of those again. I love my flying years.
Ever thought about buying an aeroplane just for the heck of it, and flying recreationally?
It's such a satisfying occupation, and really, when you're young and single, as you can imagine, going around touring the world, and there's the glamour and the being minded, and it's it's a wonderful life.
Nothing left,
but not for a married man. That's what I realised, that when I proposed to Maggie, I said that she could have me as an airline pilot or as a farmer. Mm-hmm. Because I had my 12 months on the land in New Zealand, which made me a farmer. Yeah. And I'd taken out Wendy. Wendy had some fish in Hobart when we were in Hobart, and I'd said to Wendy, whose father was one of the
well, he was the founder of, the first manager of Qantas.
Qantas. Yeah. He was one of the starters of Qantas.
Yes.
Wendy, do you think you could arrange for an interview for me to be a pilot in Qantas? And
done.
She said, Henry, yes, of course I can. So when I went to the Qantas before the board there, and you're there by virtue of the invitation of the boss's daughter, you get a pretty good reception.
I think so.
They looked at my logbook and said, yes, that's wonderful, we'd love to have you, but we're not taking on any pilots at the moment, but you'll be on the top of the list. So when I proposed to Maggie, I said that you can have me as a pilot, or it'll take time, but it'll be there. Or you can have me as a farmer. And she said, I'll have I'll have you as a farmer because I'll see more of you.
Yeah, and apart from that, you've got the hostesses, the stewardesses, who in those days were very glamorous creatures, I would have thought.
But I was
not on your Nelly.
Yes, I was pretty sure Maggie would accept me. So I resigned actually before I proposed to Maggie, so that there was a
confidence.
There was a deadline there, and
three.
Anyway, so that I became a farmer, and the 2 years I learnt to be a farmer in Australia, going from first of all in Gunnedah and then in Scone, then putting in all the time for soldier settler blocks, and for every one I put in for, there'd be another 2,000. And then I heard of the AMP Land Development Scheme in Keith, in South Australia, where all it needed was trace element, and the AMP, as a gift to the nation to celebrate their 100th birthday, said, we'll go in and buy all this country up, which is practically worthless, because that's all it was. They'd had several attempts to settle it, but each time the stock would thrive for about 6 months, then they'd get what they called in those days wasting disease, and they'd just wither away. And until the CSIRO found this that all it needed was a handful of copper and zinc, and it would be as good as any other country in New Zealand, and so in Australia. So anyway, we put our names down for that, and they said that they would give you 100% finance if you work for them for 5 years developing the scrub to pasture. And that's what we did.
Good
we
program.
worked for them for 5.5 years. Then actually we did an extra 12 months because I was stock overseer by then, and I didn't like the properties that we came up on that first time round, and I said, I'll work for you for another 12 months if you let me choose my block. And they did that, and I chose what was a beautiful block. And
How big was the block?
Pardon?
How big was the block?
1,300 acres, but 300 acres of that was sandhills, which were thrown in for nothing.
Okay.
And which really we were still able to develop down the track, but they were really too small. At the time they were the right size, but with it's asking too much of a man to give him 100% finance and expect them to pay for the fencing, the housing, the stock, and all of that, and make a go of it. It's just,
but you did.
Just too hard. So of the 100 settlers, there'd be on the fingers of one hand the people who actually survived, and each one of those expanded, as I did. We bought eventually the property on joining us on one side, and then a year later, the property on the other side, all with the Commonwealth Development Bank. And it was the most wonderful thing. In other words, you had to be refused finance from your trading bank, and that was never ever a problem. And it had to be for the good of Australia. And if you're making 2 blades of grass grow where none grew before,
yes, that's for the good of Australia.
That's obviously good.
Yeah.
So that we were able to easily overcome the good for Australia. And the first loan was a small one. And 18 months later, I went to them again and said, I want more money. And they said, well, what additional security have you got? And I said, by virtue of your first loan, come back and revalue the property, which they did. And there was enough equity there to give them that one, and I did it 7 times. Seven times.
What was the name of that bank again?
I'm sorry?
What was the name of the bank again?
The Commonwealth Development Bank. And they stopped
Why don't we have a Commonwealth Development Bank today?
Well, they stopped it because I would have bought the whole of Australia.
well, nothing wrong with that. You seem to know what you're doing.
But it was, nevertheless, it was a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful
Well, why would they stop a bank like that when we need probably exactly the same sort of system today as we did then?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it just makes so much sense that if it's for the good of Australia and it looks possible.
Yes.
And that's all they had to do. And as I kept on saying to them, because they jumped up and down a bit, but you're not backing a man you don't know. You're backing somebody you do know.
No,
and it's for the good of Australia.
And
when you think of all the hundreds of bales of wool and lambs and wheat that's come off these properties, which was just scrub before.
Yeah.
And it's
for the good of Australia. For the good of Australia. That should be the motto of every politician or public servant or banker or whatever. I mean, do you have any interest in politics? Do you ever get up in arms about the way the country is being run? After all, you, with your experience, would have a lot of feeling.
Actually, I can sympathise a little bit with them because I was making too good a thing of it. In other words...
Is that possible?
Well... There should be some mechanism in there that I believe very much in giving everyone a fair go, but a fair go is there are limits to a fair go. You don't want people getting one class of person getting too big a hand up.
Yes,
I'm a great believer that you should have to fight for what you get.
Well, it's the only way you can value it.
All you really want in life is a fair go.
Yes.
And you have to prove that you are as good as or better than your peers in order to get a hand up.
Well, what you're talking about...
And you're prepared to work for it. And I did work for it.
Yeah.
God alone knows the number of hours I put in. You asked me before about how my years of tennis, but I didn't have time for tennis. I was working. I had a wife and family and the bank's on my back.
I know that feeling. Reward and incentive, you see, I think they're the great big motivators. And you've got a beautiful family. You know, Mike Young, who's a famous scientist, and you had 3 boys, didn't you?
Yeah, 3 boys, and you know the 3 of them. Again, I've just been so fortunate in Goldsworth's. My stock firm was Goldsworth's, and then Elders bought Goldsworth's out, and so I've always said to Elders, I'm not an Elders man, you bought me, but Elders and Goldsworth put the 3 boys through university, through St. Peter's. Now, as a soldier settler, because I became a single unit soldier settler, and that's one of the reasons that I came good, was that as a soldier settler, you lease your property, whereas with the AMP, you actually bought it. And if you had a bad year, then you had the interest just accumulated on top of that, whereas under the War Service Scheme, when you leased it, that's off your income tax, and it's a much better thing, and that really is probably one of the main reasons that I survived and made a go of it, because I had this additional experience, because a lot of the boys didn't have any experience when they went on the AMP scheme, and that became painfully apparent. And so I've been just so lucky in life.
No, you make your own luck, I think, in this world. Henry Young is my special guest. Remarkable man. What would be the advice that you would give to your 20-year-old self if you could go back and talk to him?
I would say, Henry, you have to go to university. I was taken out of school in my university year to work in the bank, because my father, who was a banker, was obsessed with the fact that after the Second World War, to be the same as after the First World War, when unemployment was rife, and there are so many of the good people who were unemployed, and the reason they were unemployed because they didn't have the education. And it's a great regret in my life that I didn't have a university education, which I was absolutely determined that my boys would have. And they've proven me right, of course. You know, it's education is paramount. And that's the first thing I think that every parent should be wanting, is to give their children the opportunity to come good.
Yes.
That's all you want to do, is give them the opportunity to come good.
Yes.
Because then it's up to them, and you've done your bit. And I've tried to do my little bit.
Well, you've done extremely well. Why don't you write a book? Or have you?
No, I haven't written a book. People say that I should, and maybe when I get old.
When you get old, yes, I agree with you.
I'll get round to it, but
Mike, you've got to keep him out of the discotheques.
In my life of which I look back on with great joy, I suppose, and contentment, because although they were hard, they were good. And I had Madge with me, and it's
you miss her so much.
She was just a tower of strength. She had a chauffeur drive her to school and pick her up at when the school was over at the end of the afternoon. until she married me, and we lived for 5.5 years in two single garage walls, steel huts. They weren't. They were single garages, an 8-foot gap between the two with a sheet of corrugated iron over that, and no electricity. So it was all tilly lamps, kerosene, fridge, chip heater. You wouldn't know, but you can get a good hot shower with one sheet of the Advertiser torn into 3-inch strips. You can look back and laugh at them now, but 5.5 years with her back there, and
that's love.
Yes, that's life. But we did have those years when we were courting, when we did all the nightclubs and that, so that we were content, and we had so much to be, that we should be thankful for and grateful for.
Yeah. Oh, well, you life is what you make it, and I think you've put in, not only for yourself but for this country and your family, a wonderful contribution. Let me just say
one more thing, because it bugs me that so many of my friends give up their tennis with sort of a tennis elbow or something. In other words, it's very, very easy to give up your sport because the medical profession is so good these days that they can mend everything. And I'm a role model for longevity because I've overcome. I've got 2 new knees, a new hip, a pacemaker, a busted wrist, and
but it all works. it all works, and you're very
2 new noses. It's
and you're very tall. I'm wondering how you could possibly get into the cockpit of a Spitfire.
It's like putting on an overcoat getting into a Spitfire. There's a section of the fuselage that hinges down to get in, and you lift that up, and then you in it's a wonderful plane to fly because you're part of it. You're strapped in, and it's all around you. Everything's there, and it's. I love my Spitfire years.
I want to. On your way out,
but the Sea Fury is a Navy plane. In other words, it's big and heavy. You cut the throttle on a Sea Fury and you drop like a stone, and that's what you want on a carrier.
Yes.
Well, not so much these days, of course, with angle flight decks. If you miss a wire now, all you do is open your throttle and go round again. So I suppose it's different, but anyway, I love my flying years.
Now, before you go, I want to show you a room that I have here, because I carted around with me all over this country, and I don't quite know why, but something deep in my soul told me to do it. Lots of aeroplanes, and pictures of aeroplanes, and boats, and all kinds of World War II memorabilia. The whole room doesn't do anything. It's just filled with memories that I'm sure when you look at them, you will.
I just can't wait to see it. I just
you will
can't
identify
wait to see it.
with the stuff. And I'm not one for romanticizing war, but I think a lot of people, we would not have this great country today. We would not have the quality of life or the lifestyle that we have, except for people like you who went out there and fought to keep this country free and as it is today. And I don't know that the younger generation kind of joins the dots and quite understands that people had to go and fight for the things we take for granted today. Every time I walk into that room, I'm reminded, when I look at those pictures of those World War II aircraft, many of them in danger, in harm's way. Amazing thing to motivate a whole generation of people to go out there and fight. I don't know, the younger generation would. I fear that if we had a crisis and we called upon the younger generation, I'd go, and I'm 78, but I'd go, but I don't know that they would.
I'd go, except that I'm too old. And that would bug me.
Well, I refuse. I refuse to get old.
Right. We're a lucky country.
But
We're
you
probably
made
the
it a
most
lucky country.
cosmopolitan country in the world these days.
Yes.
And it's worth fighting for because it's unusual.
I totally
that we
agree
should
with
have
you.
All this fortune.
Not to be given away, not to be taken for granted.
Not to be taken, worth fighting for.
Yes, sir.
Very much
I
worth
can't tell you what an honour it is to meet you. I think you're a wonderful man.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the
You're a poster boy for everything I believe in.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Henry Young, ladies and gentlemen.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.